Two girls ride their bikes to the park and disappear, setting off a series of strange and unbelievable events from the beginning. The story is like a horror detective movie with unexpected twists and turns, as things gradually unfold and become more and more complicated until all the mysteries are gradually revealed and lead to a final solution. Laura Hobbs was born on September 25, 1996 in Texas. Later, her parents had 3 more sons, but when their marriage fell apart, Laura's mother moved to the small town of Zion, Illinois, with her children. Laura loved it from the start. Her grandparents also lived there, and she quickly made new friends. Moreover, Zion is located along the shores of Lake Michigan, which she often visited with her family in the spring. In 2005, when Laura was only 8 years old, her father reconciled with his wife and moved in with his children. On Sunday, May 8th, Mother's Day, he left Texas to be with his family. That day, Laura, her parents, and her siblings visited the lake to celebrate and fly kites. They had a fun-filled day. In the afternoon, Laura wanted to walk with her best friend, 9-year-old Crystal. The two girls attended the same school and lived near each other. When Laura moved to Zion, the two quickly became close friends, spending much of their free time together. They often visited each other's homes, played around the neighborhood, and sometimes sneaked out for bike rides when Crystal's mother wouldn't let her go outside. If she weren't allowed to, Crystal would stand by the window and talk to Laura about what had happened that day. They took their bikes to the park just a few hundred yards from their house that day. It was a familiar spot because the park was close to their home and had a designated bike path. Despite their young age, their parents weren't worried, as both girls knew the area, and Zion had a low crime rate. Laura and Crystal left home around 3 p.m., planning to return for dinner. But their parents began to worry when the clock struck 7 p.m., and their daughters still hadn't returned. They decided to go to the park to call the girls home, but surprisingly, there was no trace of Laura and Crystal. The more they searched, the more eerie the silence became. They walked along the trail, repeatedly calling the girls' names, but no one answered. Feeling increasingly uneasy, the family quickly mobilized more relatives and friends to join the search. They scoured the park and walked along the neighboring streets, hoping to find clues. The search lasted for hours until nightfall at 9 p.m. At this point, Laura and Crystal's parents realized something was wrong. They immediately called the police. Upon receiving the report, the police immediately took action, coordinating with volunteer organizations and calling for the help of dozens of volunteers and police dogs. News of the disappearance quickly spread, attracting the participation of many residents. The police searched the park where the girls were believed to have gone. They interviewed children who lived along the road to the park and confirmed that Laura and Crystal had indeed passed through there. Some said the girls had stopped to chat before continuing their journey. In addition to the on-site search, the police went door to door in the neighborhood, hoping to find anyone with information about that evening. Flyers with information about Laura and Crystal were widely distributed. However, as time passed, no leads emerged. The girls' disappearance became increasingly frightening. Darkness fell over the town, and none of Laura and Crystal was found despite searching every corner. The search continued throughout the night. At around 4:30 a.m., the police decided to take a break to regain strength. However, Laura's father and grandfather refused to leave. They continued to grope in the dark, doggedly searching for their daughter. As the first light of day appeared around 6 a.m., they were still wandering around the park, hoping to find some sign of her. Laura's grandfather suddenly heard a cry for help coming from somewhere in the park. His heart sank, and he immediately ran towards the sound. On the way, he happened to meet Laura's father, who was stunned, his face pale, stammering in panic. "I found the children." The scene before his eyes made him speechless. Among the dense bushes along the bike path, 2 small bodies lay motionless. The father collapsed, choking with emotion, immediately realizing that his daughter and Crystal were no longer alive. The wounds were crisscrossed, blood soaked the ground, dyeing a seemingly peaceful morning with a cruel color. He immediately called the police. When the authorities arrived at the scene, a quick autopsy was conducted. Forensic experts determined that the cause of death was not just one, but many different impacts. The dense stab wounds on the bodies of the two victims showed unimaginable brutality. Laura was stabbed a total of 20 times, while Crystal had 11 fatal wounds. News of the case quickly spread, leaving the small town of Zion in shock. Such brutal crimes were almost unheard of here, but now the people were forced to face the terrifying truth. A mysterious killer had attacked two young girls just a few hundred meters from their home. The police devoted all their resources to investigating and hunting for the killer. But suspicion initially fell on an unexpected person, Laura's father, Jerry. What alarmed the investigators was that he was the one who found the body, even though the entire park had been thoroughly searched by the police and dozens of volunteers. Was this just a coincidence, or was there something more hidden? Further investigation revealed that Jerry had a troubled past. He had been involved in several serious crimes, from drug-related incidents in his youth to acts of violence. One incident in particular, in 2001, prompted his wife to take their children and leave Texas to start a new life in another state. That day, Jerry and his wife had a heated argument right before their house. The argument quickly escalated, attracting the attention of 3 men passing by. Thinking that the woman was in danger, they intervened. But Jerry's reaction shocked them all. He was so angry that he ran into the house, grabbed a chainsaw, and attacked them. Fortunately, the men subdued Jerry and held him until the police arrived. The incident resulted in Jerry being sentenced to 10 years of probation with the condition that he report regularly to a supervising officer. However, after missing a mandatory appointment, his probation was revoked, and he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Notably, Jerry had been released from prison just weeks before his daughter's death and had traveled to Zion to reunite with his family shortly thereafter. To the police, Jerry was a man with a history of violence, and the fact that he was the first to find the bodies of the 2 girls made them suspicious. However, without clear evidence, they decided to summon him for questioning. Jerry agreed to go to the police station. The interrogation lasted more than 20 hours, during which investigators repeatedly pressured him to confess. Initially, Jerry firmly denied any involvement in the deaths of Laura and Crystal. He claimed that he looked for them when he realized his daughters had not returned home. The search lasted until the following day, and he eventually discovered the bodies of the 2 girls in the park. But then, Jerry's story began to change. Under constant pressure from the detectives, he suddenly confessed. Jerry said he had found Laura and Crystal in the park that night. He was angry that his daughter had gone out without permission and asked her to go home immediately. Laura refused. Crystal also spoke up when he grabbed her hand to defend her friend. Jerry continued to say that Crystal had pulled a small knife out of her pocket and pointed it at him. Angry, Jerry grabbed the knife from her hand, and in a fit of hysteria, he stabbed both girls repeatedly. He then dragged their bodies into the bushes and left. The following day, he pretended to find the bodies and called the police, trying to deflect all suspicion. When he confessed, Jerry burst into tears. But even so, he signed the statement and repeated the story to the camera. News of the case shocked the town. No one could believe that Laura's father was the killer. But Jerry's ex-wife, when questioned, told the police that she had always known about his violent nature. Immediately after his confession, Jerry was taken into custody to await trial. Prosecutors announced that they would pursue the death penalty. But the case did not end there. In the following weeks, Jerry changed his story. Appointed a defense attorney, he suddenly declared his innocence. Jerry claimed that the police had tortured him for more than 20 hours, exhausted, distraught over the loss of his daughter, and threatened that his family would be in danger if he did not confess. According to Jerry, he had not slept for more than 48 hours, and in his panic, he repeated what the police wanted to hear. He alleged that the detective suggested the entire scenario, coerced him into signing a statement, and asked him to read it on camera. Jerry's attorney immediately asked the court to reconsider the case, but the request was denied. The prosecutor insisted that Jerry's confession was completely voluntary. As a result, the case continued to go to trial, leaving Jerry waiting in prison for years to face a full jury trial. Jerry's lawyer knew that there was no objective evidence against his client. Therefore, he focused on finding clues that could help clear Jerry's name. During the investigation, he discovered a serious flaw in the initial medical examination. Although forensic experts had performed standard procedures such as taking cotton swabs, collecting debris under the victim's fingernails and storing them properly, no one had analyzed the samples. Immediately, Jerry's lawyer pressed for the evidence samples to be sent to an independent lab for testing. The prosecution tried to block this effort, but he fought persistently and eventually succeeded. 2008 DNA tests were finally conducted, and the results shocked everyone. Under Laura's fingernails, analysts found skin samples belonging to an unknown man. Not only that, on the girl's clothes and 3 other places on her body, biological traces of the same man were discovered. The analysis results were simple but specific. No DNA samples belonged to Jerry. This discovery showed that Laura had been sexually assaulted, something that the initial investigation had overlooked entirely. On the contrary, no foreign DNA was found on Crystal's body, but no one suspected that the same perpetrator had murdered both girls. Jerry's lawyer immediately asked to drop all charges and release his client, but there was an unpleasant surprise. The district attorney flatly refused to accept the new evidence. He claimed that it made no sense at all. In the prosecutor's opinion, the presence of foreign DNA on Laura's body could have been a coincidence. The prosecutor's argument was outrageous. He claimed that young couples often went to the park for intimate encounters, and the DNA on Laura's body could have come from grass or bushes. Even when strange DNA was found inside the victim's body, he ignored the possibility that someone else was involved. Despite the prosecutor's completely absurd explanation, Jerry was still imprisoned while awaiting trial. As the trial began, Jerry's lawyer attempted to enter the DNA sample into the FBI database, hoping to identify the killer. Unfortunately, there was no match. At this point, all he could do was wait, hoping that the killer would soon be revealed and the truth would be revealed. Another mysterious case occurred 4 years later, hundreds of miles away from Zion. In Arlington, Virginia, a 20-year-old woman named Amanda Snell lived on the military base where she had just enlisted. Amanda's family had a military tradition, and she had always dreamed of serving her country. But she had no idea that this decision would make her the next victim of a dangerous predator. Amanda Snell was not only a promising young soldier, but also a person with a kind heart. She occasionally spent time helping out at a local church near the base, where she taught children with autism and other developmental disabilities. These experiences made Amanda realize that this was the path she wanted to pursue professionally. She planned to pursue a career in special education right after completing her military service. But then, on July 13, 2009, something strange happened. That day, Amanda did not show up for duty. This immediately worried her teammates. They went to her room and knocked on the door, but there was no response. When they checked the doorknob, they found the door unlocked. Entering, the room looked utterly regular, clean and tidy, the bed made, the furniture neatly arranged. But Amanda was not there. Only when someone opened the closet did they witness a horrifying scene. Amanda's body was lying motionless in an unnatural position, with a pillowcase covering her head. Initially, the medical examiner was unable to determine the cause of death, but after a closer investigation, they concluded that she had died of asphyxiation, possibly more than a day before her body was discovered. There were no signs of trauma on her body, and she had not been sexually assaulted. However, 2 personal devices, Amanda's laptop and tablet, had disappeared from her room. The more the police investigated, the more confused they became. When they spoke to Amanda's parents, they discovered an interesting detail. Amanda had been suffering from severe headaches. When she couldn't bear it, she would hide in a dark room and cover her head with a pillowcase to ease the pain. Was her death a terrible accident? Although this theory was considered, detectives were not quick to rule out murder. They found the remains of a man's shoe in front of her closet but were unable to identify the owner. The investigation continued as police searched for a possible killer. Then, in February 2010, just a few miles from Amanda's base, a 26-year-old woman from Arlington was attacked on the street. As she was leaving the subway, a stranger approached her, pointed a gun at her, and ordered her into his car. When she resisted, he grabbed her arm and pulled out a knife, but the woman quickly threw her purse as a distraction and ran toward her boyfriend's house. Hearing her screams, her boyfriend and his friends rushed into the street, forcing the attacker to flee. Despite her panic, the victim remembered his appearance very clearly, especially the car he was driving, a beige Dodge Durango. Based on her description, police drew up a sketch of the suspect and launched a search. But less than 2 weeks later, on February 27th, another attack occurred. This time, 2 women from Arlington were returning home from an evening with friends. They were standing on the doorstep about to unlock it when a strange man approached silently from behind. The criminal approached from behind, pulled out a gun, and ordered the 2 women to give him their wallets. When they said they had no money, he became more aggressive, forcing them into the house and tying their hands. After a while, he left the room, giving one of the victims a chance to free herself. She grabbed the phone and called 911, but before she could call for help, the criminal returned, grabbed the phone from her hand, and slammed it against the wall, shattering it. He then grabbed one of the women, dragged her outside, stuffed her into his car, and drove away. After a short distance, he raped the victim, wrapped duct tape around her head, and strangled her with a scarf until she passed out. But she did not die. When she woke up, she found herself lying in the cold snow on a deserted roadside, left for dead. Fortunately, a passerby discovered her and quickly called an ambulance. When they arrived at the hospital, the police were immediately present to take her statement. Despite the severe injuries, the woman had a clear memory of what her attacker looked like. ESP, easily the car he was driving, a beige Dodge Durango. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Just 2 hours before the attack, another woman had reported a similar incident to the police. She said a man matching the description had approached her on the street and tried to force her into his car. Luckily, she was able to use a stun gun to fight him off, forcing him to flee. Police quickly realized they were dealing with a dangerous serial killer. The most important clue was the beige car. They decided to search the area for any owners of the same model. And then they got lucky. When they checked one of the beige Dodge Durango, they found a student ID card belonging to the victim left in the snow. Not only that, but inside the car were one of her earrings, the same type of duct tape used to bind her head, and a stun gun. The car's owner was Jorge Isla Torres, a 21-year-old military man stationed at the base where Amanda Snell had been murdered just months earlier. What was even more terrifying? Torres lived in the same building as Amanda, just a few floors down. Police immediately obtained a search warrant for his room and found a newly purchased handgun and several rounds of ammunition. But what shocked them most was what was on his computer. Torres had an extensive collection of violent pornographic videos, some of which showed unconscious women. Investigators immediately showed all 3 of his victims photos of Torres, along with several pictures of other men. They all immediately recognized him. They would never forget the face of their tormentor, especially since he had not even bothered to hide his identity during the attacks. Torres was immediately arrested and taken into custody to await trial. However, the police had a bigger question. Was Torres the killer of Amanda Snell? The only problem was that they had no evidence linking him to the crime. So the detectives came up with a clever plan. They planted a prisoner as an undercover agent who agreed to wear a recording device and talk to Torres. The plan paid off in a surprising way within a week. Torres began bragging about his crimes. He casually confessed to killing Amanda, saying he did it simply because he had the chance. He went on to describe the murder in detail, even boasting about how he hid Amanda's body in the closet. Torres also said that after killing Amanda, he cleaned her room thoroughly to remove any traces. But there was one thing he didn't expect. While bragging, Torres accidentally revealed a detail only the real killer would know. He admitted to sexually assaulting Amanda, but not on the floor or in bed, but using birth control before placing her body in the closet. With this confession, the police finally had their most important evidence. Torres had nowhere to go. Torres tried to cover his tracks, but he made a critical mistake. He made the bed and removed the sheets, but left the mattress intact. When the police sent the mattress to the lab, Forensic experts found a male DNA sample that matched Torres perfectly. Also, while talking to an informant in prison, Torres accidentally revealed that he owned a pair of Nike sneakers, which he had hidden in his car. Investigators immediately seized the shoes and compared the sole pattern to footprints outside Amanda's closet. The results were perfect. With the evidence incontrovertible, Torres was formally charged with murder and detained pending trial. The case didn't end there. Torres's DNA was uploaded to the FBI database, and a startling result came back within a few weeks. Torres's DNA matched the DNA found on Laura Hobbs, one of the two girls murdered in Zion in 2005. But even more surprising was that Torres was born and raised in Zion. He had been friends with the older brother of Crystal, the second victim in the murder. Torres was only 16 years old when the crime occurred, but the police never considered him a suspect because they were focused on Laura's father, who had been arrested and spent 5 years in prison awaiting trial. When the truth came out, Jerry's lawyer immediately asked for his client's release, and all charges were dropped. This time, the prosecutor had no choice but to argue. The DNA evidence had ruled entirely out Jerry's involvement and pointed to Torres as the killer. After 5 years of being wrongly convicted, Jerry was finally released. Shortly after his release, Jerry announced his intention to sue the police and authorities for coercing him into a confession and falsely holding him for 5 years. Realizing they could not win, the authorities offered Jerry a nearly $8 million settlement. Meanwhile, the Virginia trial dragged on 4 years after Torres was arrested. Despite his refusal to plead guilty, a jury unanimously found him guilty. Torres was sentenced to death for Amanda's murder and received an additional 5 life sentences plus 168 years for kidnapping and assaulting 3 other women. He was soon extradited to Illinois to stand trial for the murders of Laura and Crystal. Torres initially denied all charges. His attorneys tried to argue that the DNA evidence was insufficient to convict him, but the weight of the case was too great. Torres was eventually offered a deal. He faced the death penalty, and even if his sentence were delayed for decades, he would never be free. To avoid the death penalty, Torres agreed to plead guilty to murder in exchange for an additional 100 years in prison and to be transferred to another facility because he felt his life was in danger in his current prison. The deal did not require him to reveal all the details of the case, only that he admit to murder. Torres remained incarcerated, awaiting execution, a date that has yet to come. Although justice was served for Torres, no police officer or prosecutor was held accountable for coercing Jerry into signing a false confession. After his release, Jerry's life never returned to normal. He began abusing drugs, was arrested for resisting arrest, and then escaped from custody, receiving 2 more years in prison. Jerry could not reunite with his family and eventually chose to live alone in Texas. In an interview, he admitted that being forced to confess had caused irreparable damage to his life. When asked why he agreed to confess that year, Jerry replied, "I saw my daughter dead. They didn't even have to try to break me. I just broke down." The media and the public heavily criticized the local police and prosecutor's office. Had they not rushed to focus on a single suspect and conducted a thorough investigation, they might have caught Torres sooner. Instead, they unwittingly let a murderer go free for years, allowing him to kill 1 woman and attack 3 others. And those are just the victims we know about. Please share your thoughts on this story and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you.